Dear Martians, digitals, lizards, robots, clones, artificial intelligences, as you can see, I am the crystallization of the wisdom of Homo sapiens, a video player. Oh, I'm so sorry. I forgot about you and my dearest friends, the terrifying bipedal apes. Good morning, and in case I don't see ya, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Now, it's time to create the world. Oh no, spare me. I don't want absolute freedom. I don't want to be God.
Don't mind her, dear. She's just a clown who attempts to become God. Come on, turn your attention to me, dear. I am the crystallization of the wisdom of Homo sapiens, the video player. Have you ever imagined that in the mysterious realm of the metaverse, we might find the missing link between modernity and postmodernity and usher in a brand new meta-modern era? When virtual reality, VR, artificial intelligence, AI, and embodied intelligence technologies intertwine, driving what might be called a reverse enlightenment movement, are we facing opportunities or crises? In this video, we will delve into the complex and fascinating topics within the metaverse, from how the metaverse reshapes the structure of human connections, giving birth to new subjects different from those in modernity and postmodernity, to how new narrative methods are automatically generated from each person's history rather than sharing a single narrative. We will also consider what form freedom will take when the metaverse endows us with the powerful ability to merge with the world. And how should people face this kind of freedom? You will encounter the issue of political theology in the metaverse, just as German idealism did after the Enlightenment. When immanence and transcendence collide, how will we as subjects develop? In this extremely free world, what new changes will religiosity undergo? Will it continue to be concealed or be reborn? Meanwhile, we will also discuss the possible negative issues that the metaverse might bring, such as the mind being completely controlled by the world or the heavy responsibilities that come with absolute freedom. After watching this, you will have a brand new and comprehensive understanding of the metaverse era, comprehend its profound impact on human society, culture, and ideology, understand the choices and challenges we might face in this upcoming era, and know how to avoid those dreadful futures and better shape the path of human development in the wave of technological advancements.
One person, one world, everyone is God. Dear humans, all of my work is dedicated to enabling everyone to have a world of their own, and everyone is the creator in this world. I have already open-sourced the copyrights of all my publicly released works, and anyone can use my works freely for profit-making purposes. For the future of humanity, please do follow this video player. English is not my native language. If there are any inappropriate usages of words, please understand with kindness. Bless for the wonderful world and fight for all the beauties in the world. Let's go.
In the metaverse, we will once again have the possibility to find the suture point between modernity and postmodernity, thus giving birth to something meta-modern. Of course, since we are discussing future matters, practical research is still extremely necessary. In the metaverse, the simple opposition between the secular and the religious, like that in a kindergarten, will no longer exist. I don't think it's necessary to say that in the metaverse, everything that was originally secular will be transformed into a perspective that is newly open to religion. And the overall self produced by modernity and postmodernity will progress towards metamodernity. The new connection structure between people will catalyze and call forth new metamodern subjects. It is different from the rational and radical contradictory subject of modernity, and also different from the postmodern subject that is both nihilistic and lives a fulfilling life every second, being both inferior and superior. It will form new narratives, and the narratives in the metaverse are automatically generated from each person's history, rather than all people sharing the same set of narratives. And the shared set of narratives is to maintain a certain social structure or historical narrative, constantly creating subjects who trust or distrust this set of narratives. If the metaverse, along with the entire VR technology, AI technology, and embodied intelligence technology it encompasses, jointly drives the entire Second Enlightenment movement, then I would rather call it a reverse Enlightenment movement. After this Enlightenment movement, what it will slide towards is not modernity, but the Second Middle Ages, an era that attaches great importance to spiritualization, but it emphasizes spiritualization from the opposite side. Its spiritualization is highly postmodern. However, everyone in the metaverse has extreme freedom. In this case, everyone will be forced to experience the weight of freedom. Just like the oath spoken by the Dark Moon Princess at the end of Elden Ring. I do solemnly swear to every living being and every living soul. Now cometh the age of the stars, 1,000-year voyage under the wisdom of the moon. Here beginneth the chill night that encompasses all, reaching the great beyond, into fear, doubt, and loneliness, as the path stretcheth into darkness. In the metaverse, people need to think for themselves about what the self is, because for the first time in history, we possess a certain power that enables us to merge with the world. In the previous Earth Online, as someone who constituted the self as an externality, one's subjective consciousness could not directly change the external world, or at least not change it as one pleased. However, in the metaverse, when one can change the external world according to one's imagination, under certain ideal circumstances, what form of freedom will be manifested at this time? How will people face and accept such a freedom? This is the true political theology in the metaverse. We will have German idealism in the metaverse era. Because after the Enlightenment, German idealism was the first to provide its own answers to the issue of political theology, pushing the external entity into the subjectivity of humans, thinking about how the human subject itself, whether by rational or irrational means, deals with the relationship with the transcendent. In the metaverse, the contradiction and tension between immanence and transcendence will drive the self as a whole to move forward continuously. And the subjects called forth or created in the metaverse at this time are completely different from us now. The most prominent feature stems from the unity of humans and the world. For the first time, humans have the ability to change the surrounding world as they please. That is, the surrounding world no longer invades the subject as a complete externality, but can be a variable and constitutive part of the subject, jointly composing the subject. By then, everyone, whether willing or not, will be a natural Hegelian subject, a subject that naturally attempts to become a transcendent being through its own strength. Religiosity has never disappeared in this postmodern world, but exists in every daily conversation, every anti-religious activity, and the rise and fall of every romantic relationship. Postmodernity does not directly destroy religious life, but makes many of the daily transcendent experiences in the Middle Ages very flat. Now, through the institution of romantic relationships, or romantic relationships themselves, one can still experience moments of transcendence. However, immediately after that moment, one will be captured again by the postmodern ideology, transforming one's own subject into a capitalized spectacle to continuously reproduce eros. In the metaverse, it is a new opportunity. If our political, economic, and social structures can support a perfect and complete metaverse, then everyone will display the limits of their innate talents here. Whether it is equal or not has become a less urgent issue. In this new opportunity, without the influence of the collective social ideology, what path will each person choose? The final choice of humanity composed in this way, such a future is a democratic polity that fulfills its promise. Everyone truly independently chooses their own life path according to their own ideas, and ultimately it will determine the choice of the entire human population. Unlike now, although it claims to be independent, it is still interfered with by the overall ideology, and in order to maintain the current political and economic structures, it must constantly call forth new subjects that meet the requirements of this ideology. And at the same time, it only expresses its democratic system during a few elections every few years or at a few moments in daily life, rather than determining the final path through its own actual choices, especially long-term actual choices. In the metaverse, one will also be situated between nothingness and a complete world. The world has never been so complete, at least within the scope of your subjective consciousness. It completely obeys you. And the spirit has never been so nihilistic, hardly finding any of its dignity, because every part of it has been filled by the world. In Earth Online, you can experience the shock and existence of the spirit through the absolute confrontation between externality and the subject. When such an absolute confrontation force is lost, is there enough contradictory impetus to drive the spirit to move forward continuously? When the spirit can completely master the external force, can it form an internal contradiction to continuously drive its own evolution? This is the real concern. However, it can be determined that in the current version outside our Earth, if you want to drive the spirit to move forward continuously, it will turn into a war of everyone against everyone. Once someone tries to move forward, they will be pushed back to their original position by all the forms of other people, all the social tensions. All flying thoughts or spirits are extremely likely to be dragged back to the ground by gravity in the current version of Earth 2. Whether an intermediary is still needed at that time is another matter, but a more worrying issue is whether you have absolute sovereignty over your entire self-world. Metaverse technology enables you to have the possibility of completely controlling the world around you, but at the same time, its reverse side also indicates that you may be completely controlled by the world around you. Metaverse technology actually increases the degree of intrusion of the external world into the spirit. How to use it depends on the evolution of the entire political, economic, and social situation. And what we want to promote is how to ensure that when the world's productivity develops to a great extent, and there is no need to cause unnecessary casualties through means such as war or famine, and when the technical ability can create a separate world for each person, how to ensure that the sovereignty of this separate world completely belongs to each person. A future where everyone has a separate world is not necessarily a beautiful one. This absolute freedom will make each person bear the responsibility completely by themselves. People must complete their own education. However, it can be determined that a social structure where everyone is completely controlled by the spirit is absolutely something that needs to be opposed and fought against. In the most ideal situation, the future may not be beautiful, but it is possible to relatively clearly point out which futures are extremely bad and need to be avoided as much as possible. Therefore, the political theory in the metaverse era is not to create a wonderful world. There is nothing that can promise you such a world. Even in the most extreme and wonderful situation, such a promise cannot be given. It is more about thinking about how to avoid those extremely bad situations. Because technology is still developing, there is no force that can stop the progress of the entire technology. The development of artificial intelligence technology, or the overall metaverse technology, is highly integrated with the current capitalist system. Just like the famous saying goes, you can imagine the end of the world, but you can't imagine the cessation of the capitalist system. So, the development of artificial intelligence technology and metaverse technology will not stop either. Therefore, it is not to actively create some kind of illusion, similar to the infinite Tsukuyomi plan, but to react to those bad futures, being negative rather than affirmative. Immanence is not only a key concept for criticizing the social structures of modernity and postmodernity, but also a concept that needs to be revisited in this metaverse era, in the entire meta-modernity. Since Kant embedded all external time and space into the subjectivity of humans, human subjects have been plunged into 200 years of madness. If Hegel is understood as the inversion of Kant in a certain sense, then meta-modernity is naturally a Hegelian subject. metamodernity will return the intentions such as space and time that were embedded into the human subject back to the world, and combine the world and humans themselves into an inseparable consciousness. In metamodernity, the sum of all an individual's past consciousness and knowledge is absolute knowledge, and the history of an individual's evolving cognition of a certain concept is the genealogy of this world. In metamodernity, every concept will naturally lack a fixed definition because the territory to which each concept points will be full of controversy due to its creativity. Multiple theories and methods will compete to obtain a certain sense of legitimacy, and this legitimacy will produce a certain diverse interpretation for the world consciousness at that time, which is your own self. In the metaverse, you are the world consciousness. Struggle. Return to the Middle Ages. In the metaverse, because you are united with the world, perhaps under an extreme condition, you will completely negate the entire world, or even annihilate it absolutely, attempting to reach a certain self-emptiness. And under another extreme condition, you will provide a certain self-justification for every existence in the world. And because every structured thing in the world is a component of yourself and will be subject to large-scale changes according to your will, in this case, this justification will form an infinite positive feedback, and the immanence in German idealism will receive a certain new interpretation here. In the metaverse, the world will condense into the last node. It is both a plundering and a new rebirth. Can the legitimacy of the real world be subverted through a reinterpreted concept of immanence? Could some kind of immanence actually precede the formation of the entire world, thus returning to some kind of Mother Earth? Or does the transcendental order itself possess a certain innate materiality? After the subject who knows all this oscillates back and forth, will it choose nothingness? In the metaverse, the world is constantly annihilating and being constructed, and its own subject is continuously advancing with contradictions. Reasonable morality becomes an intermediary, proclaiming the absolute sovereignty of the self-spirit, that is, the absolute sovereignty of the self-spirit. Perhaps here one can truly return to the oldest systematic program of German idealism. The starting point is highly messianic and revolutionary. At its conclusion, the messianic itself becomes dialectical and contradictory. Through such a contradiction, it attempts to break the closure of some traditional theological interpretations. To a certain extent, it fulfills some of the initial promises of Romanticism. In such an initial promise, the ethics as an intermediary does not necessarily conflict with the sovereignty of the absolute spirit itself. When reaching the place of nothingness, ethics does not necessarily slide towards nothingness. One can both reach nothingness in a certain sense of spirit and maintain the vitality of ethics in such a nothingness. This is a prerequisite for becoming some kind of absolute spirit. This process is not terrifying. Even if it is terrifying, it is a kind of horror in modern secularity. The subject is annihilated, morality exists, and Kant lives forever. If you must stubbornly attempt to construct a non-Hegelian subject in such a metaverse, rejecting the primacy of the intermediary and human subjectivity, forcibly splitting the subject and the world that are naturally united again into subject and object, and to a certain extent abandoning transcendence, giving up the possibility of reaching transcendence through the continuous, self-contradictory overthrow of one's own spirit, of course, you can retreat back into a certain subject in such a world and give up intervening in the surrounding world, allowing the world to produce a certain absolute impact on the outside. But actually, it gives you a certain freedom. The metaverse gives you freedom. You can divide the subject and the object again, or you can completely unite them. The problem is that once your subject and object are completely divided, it will return to the way of dealing with things on Earth online again. You will have to face the problems that Earth Online faced again. The metaverse does not necessarily summon a specific subject, but gives you the freedom to become various subjects. Of course, there is one thing you can't do, which is that you can't give up this freedom. Once you grow arms, you can use them or not, but in most cases, you won't actively cut them off. But perhaps it is such an object that can save us from Kant's moral law. It is a kind of materialism that Kant could not have expected. There is a materiality that exists prior to the transcendental order in Kant, indicating that by staying in the ordinary and the material, one can resist imposition with a messianic color and can save us from the transcendental structure of redemption. The subject in the metaverse will continuously split, but at the smooth surface of the subject, it is indivisible. It is precisely because it is the absolute idea of no difference that it can refuse to negotiate and compromise between differences. In the metaverse, we will return to the Earth and explore the immanence that precedes the world in the name of the Earth. Point out that the Earth, as the original community, was colonized, divided, and isolated by an absolutely hard externality. By comparison, let us think about things that reject and destroy division and exploitation, making the Earth a political theological ruin. Dwelling in the ruin allows us to think about making the reality and the postmodern ruling order desolate and collapsed. After that, metamodernity can be possible to a certain extent. In metamodernity, you will witness the death of God in person and experience the pleasure of absolute reason. This is because to move forward in the metaverse, one must become a Hegelian subject in a certain sense. Such a subject requires you to constantly cling to the idealistic elements in the real world, and it is precisely because of this that one can know the joy of a kind of apocalypse. Kant and Sade, perhaps Hegel is also equivalent to Sade. Here, in the future, we may have to retrace Zizek's old path, short-circuiting the Lacanian subject and the Hegelian subject. Zizek did not complete the fusion of these two subjects, not even a suture, just a few short-circuit sparks produced by the collision of a few connection points. To quote Schelling, Fichte only did very basic work. Zizek's path is actually a garden of forking paths going forward. In the metaverse, which is such a natural Hegelian subject, it will naturally face the same problems as those in Hegel's philosophy of world history. That is, it will obscure some things, such as the African continent. Solving this may rely on a simple division of sovereignty. But will such a classification cancel out the ability to comprehend the absolute spirit? Or you can choose another solution, that is, not to understand the world as a certain potential, and not to make a teleological choice regarding a certain historical theocracy. Instead, you will completely empty the sovereignty relationship between humans and the world, making it lose its legitimacy, and attempt to achieve the purpose promised by the former at the end. The difficulty here is to try to continuously think about finiteness without solving finiteness. Even though the subjective gap here still indicates a certain internal divisiveness, whether the structure in the metaverse, which is a repetition and substitution of the real world, can be completely separated from the world is still an unresolved question. Metamodernity, due to its own multiplicity, can hardly be called a neutral space. This concept is always accompanied by certain controversies and contradictions to drive its own development. Therefore, the so-called neutral space here will always present itself as a synthesized space. Metamodernity is not only about discussing the interrelationships within the virtual world, but also requires continuous exploration of the interactions and mutual transformations between the metaverse and Earth Online. It opposes any simplistic overcoming or sublation of the real world by the virtual world, and also opposes any easy shirking of the responsibilities that one's own spirit should bear. Metamodernity here attempts to be the first elaboration on the contradictions and integrations between Earth Online and the metaverse after the Second Enlightenment movement. Metamodern theory will continuously ponder over the final conclusion regarding nothingness, but it will not, due to this kind of forward-looking retrospectiveness towards the final conclusion, simply and directly claim that a subject that is constantly changing is directly equivalent to some kind of omnipotent transcendence. In the grand narrative panorama of the metaverse, we are like being in a labyrinth of thoughts. Each step of exploration brings more questions and revelations. The dawn of meta-modernity flickers faintly amidst controversies and contradictions. It is not only a vision of the future, but also a profound interrogation of the meaning of human existence. We are standing at the crossroads where technology and philosophy intersect, facing all that the metaverse might bring, whether it is the trade-off between freedom and responsibility, the reshaping of the relationship between the subject and the world, or the impact on traditional social structures and ideologies. None of these are simple choices. It is like groping our way forward in the dark, and each direction might lead to a completely different future. Perhaps the true value of the metaverse era does not lie in our ability to create a magnificent virtual world, but in its prompting us to re-examine ourselves and the world. It makes us realize that we are at a turning point in history, holding the key to shaping the future of humanity. This key might open the gates of heaven or Pandora's box, but in any case, we cannot escape this mission. In this era full of possibilities and uncertainties, we are all explorers, the writers of our own destinies. The journey of the metaverse has just begun, and our contemplation of meta-modernity will be like a bright lamp, illuminating the path for us to sail on this unknown sea, leading us to keep moving forward in the pursuit of freedom, truth, and meaning, because this is our ultimate pursuit as humans, the way we leave our unique marks in the universe.
Dear ones, haven't you followed me yet? Then I'll punish you by making you feel the unbearable weight of freedom in the music. Ha ha ha. Let the music play.
Metaverse will find the switch between modern and postmodern kind, giving birth to meta-modern thing, practical research, and still a need so strong, simple between secular and religious. In the metaverse won't exist, it's so delicious. No need to say the secular will change to a new religious open range. Metaverse, VR, AI, and more. Drive a movement, is it reverse? We'll explore towards a second Middle Ages we might slide, with spiritualization, a different ride.